Now, there are some all-time great characters in TV show fiction. Walter White, Tony Soprano and Tyrion Lannister, they all stand at the very top. But for me, there's one man that stands above these great characters. A man who has reached the very pinnacle of fiction in my eyes, and that is of course Rick Grimes. Now, this isn't a comparison on TV shows as a whole, but rather a singular character, and everyone pales in comparison when put up against Rick Grimes for me. No matter what your opinion of The Walking Dead is, Rick Grimes was always there to steady the ship, and Andrew Lincoln delivered some of the most phenomenal acting I've ever seen. Now, you're probably all thinking right about now, who is this random guy that is absolutely glazing Rick Grimes? Well, my name's Theo, and although this is a very subjective video, I'm going to be going over why I think Rick Grimes is the best written and acted character in TV show fiction history. So, without further ado, let's get straight into the video. I think part of the genius to the character of Rick Grimes is just how incredibly human he is. He is not a stereotypically good or bad person, he's just a man trying to do the right thing and protect his family in a world that makes those things increasingly impossible. Every choice Rick makes, every brutal decision and every sacrifice comes from this deep-rooted desire to keep his post-apocalyptic family safe. I mean, The Walking Dead has a pretty bleak and harsh environment that brings out the absolute worst in humanity. The Governor, the Claimers and Negan are all products of their environments, and traversing this landscape is incredibly dangerous. There is something so grounding about his gradual transformation that feels so incredibly raw. Whilst we do see Rick gradually morph into this survival specialist, he never truly loses his humanity, like some of the others I've mentioned. Yes, he does have incredibly dark moments where he sits on that extremely fine line of right and wrong. Hell, some might argue he even crosses said line occasionally. But that's exactly what makes him feel so human. He's not this stereotypical hero, he's just a guy doing his very best to survive in quite frankly an awful world. And this is where part of the character's genius lies. He's just a family man. If you look at the foundations of most of the greatest characters ever written in fiction, most of them have one thing in common, and that is, they are all normal people, with family or personal issues, or at least were at some point in whatever story they are involved in. It's human nature to feel attached to people that we can relate to, and Rick Grimes is no exception. And although The Walking Dead in its later seasons may stray away from its more grounded and human interest storylines, Rick Grimes as a character certainly does not. And although he is constantly getting new subplots to explore, his ultimate goal always remains the same, and that is protecting the ones he loves. Now, not everyone is lucky enough to have their own Rick Grimes protecting them, so thankfully today's sponsor Aura will fill that void. Big companies with poor security are getting hacked every single day, and your personal information is being sold on the dark web. So spammers, scammers, and identity thieves can all target you. However, Aura prevents this and keeps you safe online by doing all of the hard work for you. They will identify data brokers who are selling your information and submit an opt-out request on your behalf. Give Aura a few weeks and you'll stop seeing your information on all of these sites, which in turn will lead to a lot less spam. Aura will also continuously monitor the dark web and alert you if they find any personal information of yours exposed. On top of this, they will also alert you if anyone tries to use this information to access any of your credit or bank accounts. And if that wasn't good enough, they will also give you up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen. So stop leaving yourself vulnerable to data breaches and brokers and go to my unique link in the description to get your 14-day free trial and see if any of your data has been exposed. So thank you to Aura for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back to Rick Grimes. If you ask 99% of Walking Dead fans who their favourite dynamics are within the show, many will say Rick and Daryl, or Glenn and Rick, or maybe even Rick and Shane, or if you're more of a fan of romance, maybe Rick and Michonne. Either way, does anyone else notice the common denominator here? Spoiler alert, it's Rick Grimes. As a character, he is so good at elevating others, often acting as a narrative mirror. He reflects and contrasts with other characters, highlighting their growths and allowing them time to shine. Let's take Daryl for example. We first meet Daryl in season 1 of the show, and he's a rough and ready redneck, who seems the polar opposite of the law-abiding police officer that is Rick Grimes. But gradually the two of them become unlikely friends, and by the later seasons, it's a relationship that resembles brotherhood more than it does a friendship. Now, Rick elevates the character of Daryl, because narratively speaking, the two have vastly different goals in life. Rick's is to rebuild and take care of his family, whilst Daryl's more suited to thriving in the shadows. But Rick brings him out of his shell, and although Daryl is still an awesome character in Rick's absence after season 9, he just doesn't quite hit the same. And that's because he needs Rick to amplify his own character. He feeds off Rick, who leads and takes charge. But these two characters have one of the most heartwarming friendships of all time, and it's a joy to watch the two blossom throughout the show. Let's look at another example. Rick's former best friend Shane. Now the whole dynamic is a complete masterpiece, start to finish, between the two of them. The way we gradually find out Rick's wife has been sleeping with Shane, and his return, and then the build-in tension that all culminates in that iconic standoff between the two former friends on Herschel's farm. It's just pure cinema. But again, we see the writers using Rick as a mirror to the more morally grey Shane here. It's this dynamic and clash of philosophies which made the early seasons of The Walking Dead just so compelling. It was Rick, a man so fixed on keeping his humanity, versus Shane, who was so quick to let it go. Ultimately, Shane was built for the apocalypse, but Rick was made by it. This forced the audience to ask questions about themselves and pick sides, and although Shane is also one of the best written characters in fiction, Rick is a huge reason for why this storyline was just so engaging. At this stage, it was a zombie show that didn't rely on gore or horror to draw the audience in, rather the characters and their dynamics, and Rick was at the forefront of all of this. Now, I could go on forever about Rick's relationships and his ability to enhance others. Like I mentioned, Glenn and Rick, Michonne and Rick, or even his relationships with Herschel and Negan. Everything he does is just so incredibly engaging, and I can't think of another character in any other TV show that enhances characters as well as Rick is able to do, whilst also managing to shine individually. Now, I could genuinely talk all day about the raw and gritty transformation of Rick, or how incredibly moving his character progression is, but I want to talk about what actually sets him apart from other great characters in fiction. Many protagonists are either hyper competent, such as Sherlock Holmes, Michael Scofield, or even Olivia Pope, or on the different end of the spectrum, deeply flawed anti-heroes, such as Walter White, Ghost, or even Tony Sopranos. But Rick is different. He exists in that perfect middle ground between the two categories. And the show delves into the psyche of Rick at times, and the character is so incredibly vulnerable. Take when Laurie died, or even when Glenn and Abraham did. These deaths feel so real because they have such a profound impact on our characters. They don't just move on, we see how they deal with the loss of loved ones, and every loss leaves a permanent scar on Rick. And although he leads, he often struggles psychologically with the decisions he's forced into making. It's such a rare balance that it makes him stand out in the world of fiction for me. Now, this may come down to the environment that Rick's in compared to others, but his storyline is filled with heart-wrenching moral choices that shape and change him. And unlike most other characters in fiction, he doesn't always make the right choice. His leadership is both inspiring, but incredibly flawed, and it makes you think, what would I do if I was in Rick's situation? I think the setting of a zombie apocalypse just further amplifies the stakes of the character, and it keeps me more engaged in general. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Prison Break and Breaking Bad and whatever other show, but it's just something about the apocalypse that always piques my interest. And although in his absence from the show, it does start to go downhill, his impact is still felt. He shapes every character's decision moving forward, whilst not even being on the show. Daryl searches for him, Judith carries on his newfound philosophy, and others try and continue the vision he created. It's the fact his legacy still continues to drive the story when he's not even in the show. This just proves how powerful the character is to the narrative. The Walking Dead is Rick Grimes, and it's his story, and although at times the writers do their very best to try and stray away from this key component, I'm looking at you, Scott Gimple, #JusticeForCarl, he is what keeps the show so engaging. In conclusion, Rick's transformation from an upholding citizen to a ruthless killing machine, and then coming full circle to a hopeful visionary, is just incredible. And his evolution is painfully earned through loss and trauma. I mean, let's be honest, Rick lost his wife, his son, his right arm, was forced to kill his best friend, watched Glenn and Abraham get beaten to death with a bat right in front of him, was abducted by the CRM, and missed the first years of his son RJ and his daughter Judith's lives. The bloke's been through a hell of a lot in the apocalypse. I mean, I wouldn't wish any of this on my worst enemy, but every stage of Rick's journey is believable, which is part of his greatness. And the fact that Andrew Lincoln has never won an Emmy for this performance is borderline a crime against humanity. I think Rick Grimes is one of the most iconic characters in all of fiction, and I mean, if you've never watched the show, you'll have heard of the name Rick Grimes, and ultimately what makes him a character standalone at the top for me is he's just so unique. He embodies human survival and encapsulates the complexity of human emotions. We see him break down and rebuild countless times, and his story isn't about being the strongest, the smartest, or even the richest. It's about that deep-rooted desire that lies within everyone, and that is to survive. So for me, that's why Rick Grimes is the greatest character in TV show fiction. But like I said at the start of this video, this topic of course is extremely subjective and you might all have totally different opinions to mine, so I'd love to hear them all down below in the comments. If you are new here, please do like and subscribe as we are on the road to 10,000 subscribers. Thank you all so much for the recent support, it means the world, and with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.